would like to address once people have had a chance to sit down and finish their conversations. The first concerns language as a carrier of culture and identity. The second concerns language as a mirror of social history. And the third concerns language as an identity badge and a symbol of political recognition. So to start with language as a carrier of culture and identity, my first point would be that language helps the Roma define who they are, and so it also helps us understand who the Roma are. In popular images, gypsies, and we use for the benefit of the interpreters and translation for gypsies, are often equated with travelers or nomads of various backgrounds. There are also some research traditions, especially in the social sciences, that define gypsies as populations of diverse origins, but with a specific, particular socioeconomic profile, specializing in mobile trades and mobile services. Both these popular images and this particular research tradition have led to much confusion in the political discourse. European institutions, such as the European Commission and the Council of Europe, struggle to define who they mean when they talk about Roma or Gypsies. On the one hand, they acknowledge Romani nation with its own distinct culture and its own history. On the other hand, they keep referring to the label Roma Gypsies as an umbrella term that includes travelers and nomads of different backgrounds. Since there is no clear definition of the target group for Roma Gypsy policy at the European level, there can be no guarantee that any implementation of policy and recommendations can have a chance of success. What does being Roma mean to Romani people? For the Romani people, definitions are very clear. A Romani person is somebody whose family language is Romani. There are, of course, some cases of individuals who identify as Roma because their parents spoke Romani or because their grandparents spoke Romani, even though the language has not been passed on to the younger generation. There are also cases of entire communities, notably among the Romani populations in England, in Scandinavia, Spain, Portugal, where people identify as Rom on the basis of their use of a Romani-derived vocabulary that is still used in family conversation, even though the language itself has been lost. But by and large, Roma define themselves as people who speak or spoke in previous generations the Romani language. This is in contrast to the way that they are often defined by outsiders, as travelers or nomads, as a lifestyle. And so understanding the relevance of the Roman language to Roma culture is key to understanding who the Romani people are. I'd like to move on to language as a mirror of social history. Sharing a language is not a historical coincidence. Romani people don't share a language because they went out and taught themselves a common language. They obviously don't share a language of their own because it is the language of the territory in which they live. Romani populations Romani speakers are always in the minority, and Romani populations are dispersed geographically. Rather, Romani people share a language because they share a history, and because maintaining the distinct language of their own is a vital part of the shared tradition that they maintain. There have been many suggestions that Romani culture manifests itself in the Romani language, and that language is a key to understand Romani culture and traditions. I tend to be skeptical towards such assertions. It is true that some aspects of Romani vocabulary point to key cultural concepts. For example, the fact that the default words for man and woman in Romani differentiate between ro or ni and gajo, gaji, depending on whether the person referred to is a member of the group or not, is an indication of the importance given in Romani culture to the distinction between insiders and outsiders. But this is an exception. There are many myths about the Romani languages in the era of culture, and I'd like to mention just a couple of those. Some authors have suggested that Romani people have difficulties following time schedules because their dialects of the Romani language do not differentiate between the words for yesterday and tomorrow, or because some dialects don't have a separate future tense. I've heard many school teachers repeat this assumption, and I've seen it written in publications that pretend to be academic. This is complete nonsense. Every concept of time can be expressed in Romani, and there is no such thing as grammatical deprivation. Some writers, including scholars and even some linguists, have suggested that the Romani language lacks important vocabulary, and that Romani people therefore need to include words from other languages or switch into other languages in the middle of the conversation. The reality is that code switching from one language to another during conversation, and the insertion of foreign words is very common among every single population of bilingual people around the world, and it is not at all unique to Romani. Historically, English has a very high percentage of French words. Japanese has a high percentage of English words. Persian has a high percentage of Arabic words. The borrowing of words from one language to another is a natural process, and it has nothing to do with language deficiencies. Some authors have suggested that the presence of certain words in Romani language, points to a particular ancient culture that the Roma had before they came to Europe. Activist, author, and linguist Ian Hancock, for example, has claimed that the Romani words for knife, for shout, for argue, are Indic, and that this proves that the ancestors of the Romans were warriors. There's absolutely no scientific basis for such assertions. Romani also has Indic words for the words to beg, to sing, to dance, to steal, to cheat, and that does not indicate that the ancestors of the Romans were beggars, singers, dancers, or thieves. Romani has Indic words for the numbers up to 6, but not for 7, 8, and 9. Those words derive from Greek. That does not mean that the ancestors of the Romans could only count up to 6. But the Romani language does allow us to learn quite a bit about Romani history, even beyond what is recorded in historical documents. And I will give just 2 examples. The first is well known. It is thanks to the study of language that we know that the Romani people originated in India. Some scholars, such as Judith Buckley and Ben Willems, continue to dispute this. They claim that the Romani language was acquired by nomadic traders on the trade routes. There's no precedent in the history of language for a population acquiring the language in such a way. The Romani language is clearly of Indic origin, and that clearly points to India as the country of origin of the Romani people. Popular sources continue to claim that the language originated in North India or Northwest India, although historical linguistics has shown that the language originated in Central India and then underwent some changes in the north before leaving South Asia. None of this is documented in historical records, but we can read it from looking at language data. The second point for historical reconstruction concerns the connections between Romani groups in Europe. For many years, linguists were engaged in postulating so-called dialect branches of the Romani language. They proposed that the present-day dialects of Romani each belong to a subfamily of the language. There are speculations as to where exactly these subfamilies emerged. Some say that they may have emerged before immigration to Europe. Some say that they reflect different waves of migration within Europe. This notion of dialect branches has become so prevalent that it has been taken over by some social scientists as well, who believe that Romani populations can always be classified according to the dialects that they speak, and that dialects form strict boundaries. I take a critical approach to this view. My own research and that of my collaborators has shown over the past decade that Romani dialects form a geographical continuum, just like most other languages. Of course, this continuum is sometimes interrupted when groups migrate from one location to another, but our historical and comparative research shows that most of the differences between the dialects of Romani emerged after the initial settlement in Europe around the 16th and 17th centuries. Today's dialect map of Romani shows that neighboring Romani populations tend to speak similar dialects. This means that travel and nomadism in the history of the modes were not random. Romani populations rather settled and had contacts mainly with those Romani groups that settled close to them. So again, the language maps allows us to read and collect insights into the undocumented social history of Romani populations. My final point concerns language as an identity badge and as a symbol of political recognition and the political status of Romani. Language has always served as a badge of national identity, and the elites of every emerging nation put much effort into elevating language into a symbol of national unity. This kind of thinking inspired the members of the International Romani Union when they began their activities in the early 1970s. Developing a standard Romani language was very high on their agenda. There are still a number of activists who believe that there should be a uniform way of writing, and perhaps even of speaking Romani, at least for official purposes. Some argue that this would make it easier for Romani people from different countries to understand one another. This argument finds some support among activists and intellectuals who are engaged in international networks. The main argument, however, is that a standard Romani language can act as a symbol of unity, and that it can be used to inspire people to promote Romani emancipation. There are several reasons why efforts to promote the standard Romani have failed, and why such efforts appear to be futile and perhaps not necessary. Firstly, there are practical obstacles. There's no central government or education system that can promote the standard Romani. The International Romani Union has failed to unite Roma, and most Roma do not find its ideas of language inspiring. Only a handful of people follow the International Romani Union's guidelines in standard Romani, which are largely promoted by one single individual, and a system of education put in place in Romania. But more importantly, Romani people recognize that a standard is not necessary and that it serves no function. Romani activists and ordinary Romani people alike are able to communicate with one another when they meet Roma from other countries in face-to-face conversation. Barriers to mutual comprehensibility are negligible in face-to-face conversations, but they are also marginal in writing. My research collaborators and I have been studying online written communication in Romani in a variety of media: translations of documents, email discussion lists, social media and websites. We encounter a mix of dialects and communication routes very well. Activists do not seem to feel a need for a unified symbol either. The mere act of writing in Romani is seen as an emancipatory act and a demonstration of one's identity. Indeed, most activists prefer to express their own identity in their own dialect, rather than comply with an imposed standard. Finally, modern technology and online communication mean that people are moving away from strict norms and over to flexible and creative use of language. This is a universal trend, and it can be observed in emails, text messages, and chat forums worldwide, and in all different languages. It would be odd if Romani were to go against this trend in the opposite direction. So where does that leave policy on language? Acknowledging the Romani language and its role in public discussion instruction and in education is important, and it is right that European institutions continue to refer to the need to promote Romani. Many have done so already, but there is often little implementation on the ground. There is a very strong network of linguists as well as of language activists, and they are in a position to make a contribution toward promoting Romani. Romani is one of the very few languages for which the Council of Europe has designed a European curriculum network, framework. We have recommendations on how to teach Romani, and we have an online animated learning forum for the language, which I'll demonstrate in a moment, Romani, which was developed last year with the support of the European Commission. We need to expand such resources, especially for training teachers and raising awareness of the language. The Romani project at the University of Manchester, which I've been leading since 1999, has developed a website which it launched in 2006. We have since had some 50,000 unique visitors annually on an average, and that is many more than linguists who specialize in researching the Romani language, I can assure you. And that shows the considerable interest worldwide. Another online resource, Romex, is an online multi-dialect dictionary of Romani. And it receives some 70,000 unique visitors every year. And our project is about to launch the Romani Virtual Library, which will document online teaching and learning materials for Romani, international resolution texts, and translations into the language. So Romani is flourishing, and it's on the way to becoming a recognized minority language and occupying a place that it deserves as the language of more than at least 3.5–4 million people in Europe. In the couple of minutes that remain, I'd like to just show you a few highlights of the website. And first is the DVD Rome, called that because it's about Rome, which we produced, and copies of which you can download from the website. You can also find outside in the reception desk, and you're welcome to help yourself. I'll just show a very brief demonstration of it. It can be listened to and followed in about 17 different languages, including Romani. This is just the French version.
Partez avec nous à la découverte de la langue romanie. C'est la langue parlée par un peuple connu sous le nom de Tziganes. Les Tziganes, eux, pour s'identifier, utilisent le nom de Rome ou Roma, et ils dénomment leur langue romanesque.
And on the DVD itself, you can navigate to different areas, look at the origin of the language,
Quelles sont les origines de la langue romanie?
and so on. Another resource is RomaniNet, which I mentioned. This is an animated Romani language course, which can be used in a variety of target languages. And it's quite unique. It teaches you a dialect of Romani that is spoken around northern Serbia and is very easily intelligible with dialects spoken in Southeastern Europe as well as in Central Europe. I'll just give you a brief demonstration. There's dialogues, vocabulary exercises, and so on.
Să stimați de Gaia sunt reclami, Gaia sunt idei.
Aceea shukache. Simange shukake pinjaramantosa. Sasi chirona. Nissen erosa.
And finally, the Romex dictionary. I think everybody uses online dictionaries nowadays, but this was launched in 2001, and it was one of the very, very first online dictionaries. And what is unique about it is that it is a dictionary that can help you translate from, I've lost the count now, but it's something like 28, or at least, something like 20 different dialects of Romani into a variety of target languages. So you can choose your Romani dialect and your target language and put in a word, and you'll find something similar to that. It's just done as random. So I think we're very much online through intense networking of specialists and speakers of the language in many countries, and with the support of European institutions and research bodies in different countries. There's been immense progress in the last decade in promoting the Romani language, and I think we're on the right track. Thank you.
would like to make a presentation